Hey everybody, this is Chris from Skeleton. This video is part of an ongoing series showcasing progress updates for Skeleton v3, also known as Skeleton X. Today's updates are quite large, so we're splitting this up into two videos. The first video should already be live by the time you see this, which is covering pop-ups or popover features, things like tooltips, that kind of stuff. This video is going to be a little bit more focused on modals and sort of a singleton queue system that we've kind of worked with in V2 and are looking to carry over to V3. So without hesitation, let's go ahead and get started. So I've brought up the V2 model page, the documentation, just so you can see what a modal is, what it looks like. So if I click this, you'll see a little kind of pop-up interface that shows in the middle of the screen. There's a little fade here on the backdrop. It can have different content kind of swapped in the middle here. And then there's usually some kind of like press escape or click a button to close that. We've got different kind of variations of this, some that look more like a dialogue. So you have like an alert that's kind of giving you a message or multiple. We've got confirmation. We've got a prompt to prompt for some information. And then we even have a system in place to allow you to kind of create your own custom components that are fed in and displayed in this little kind of modal section on the page. And so things like creating your own forms or list or images with your own kind of dismiss actions, or even like full screen kind of takeovers using the modal system. So I will kind of be referring to drawers, which are like slide up panels that come from, one edge of the screen, or toasts, which are like little alerts that kind of pop up at some various portions of your screen. They usually kind of queue up. There's usually multiple displayed. I might call those toasts or alerts, but all of this is kind of under the umbrella of modals because that's what they all are. They are kind of confined to that term. As part of the process of porting everything from Skeleton V2 to V3, the kind of first consideration we had early on was how do we improve this system? Because it's grown quite a bit in scale and scope and complexity, and we want to ensure that we're providing kind of the best solution for you, for our end users. And so we are looking at a few different approaches to this, which is what I'm going to cover today. The first is we've heard from a lot of folks that say, hey, I want to just essentially kind of do away with this kind of idea of a registry or queue. I just want to click a button and have a dialogue on the screen and have that display. And so there is a native solution for this in all browsers. This has been supported for a while, called the dialogue element. It's a native HTML element. It can be interfaced with JavaScript, so you just kind of create a dialogue like this with a specific element. You can set kind of a default state. You can provide any kind of content within it, including buttons and kind of form handlers to handle like close or open state. And then it kind of displays that on the page. There's a backdrop that kind of displays. It's very similar to what we have just natively built in the browser. It supports some accessibility features, like if I hit escape on my keyboard, it will automatically close that. I think if you click on the backdrop, it doesn't close automatically, but again, they do pretty good with accessibility features. The real issue with this is they can be a little clunky. They can be a little bit difficult to work with. They could definitely be very difficult to style. Things like animations don't necessarily work as well as you want, which is why when we were implementing this for Skeleton, prior versions of Skeleton, we implemented to kind of build our own system, to build our own approach for this. And there's lots of third-party libraries that do similar stuff. But, again, we were trying to kind of go that extra mile to provide some power user features and really make sure it works with the theming system that Skeleton provides. So going forwards, we're kind of thinking through different approaches. The dialogue element may be one of those. Likewise, as part of the discussion in the previous video today, we're talking about maybe bringing in and using floating UI for portions of this. So floating UI, if you don't know, is a JavaScript positioning library. It's typically used for more of like drop-down menus or tooltips or something like that. Like you hover something and that kind of element appears on the screen, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about. But they do have support for more complex features. So if we come in here and we look at, some of their demos here, they have a dialogue, and then we can open a little sandbox here, which will open a little demo and show here's what a dialogue looks like using floating UI. You click a button, sort of a dialogue or modal or whatever you want to call that pops up. It has some options that you can interact with, and then that can be closed. You can even like click off in kind of the empty area in the shim here, the backdrop, and that will close. So the positioning is handled by floating UI. A lot of like the positioning, the interaction is handled by whatever framework you're using. So the demos are using React, which in part is done because React in these demos has a lot of extra features for floating UI. They have their own kind of dedicated React flavored version or flavored package that provides special React hooks, interaction states. You can do accessibility roles. You can do all these extra bonus features if you're in the React world. Now, we know that all of our existing users for Skeleton, or the majority of users, are coming from Svelte and the Svelte world. And so, this does kind of leave a bit of gap because if you'll notice, they don't have these same kind of bonus features for Svelte. We have reached out to the kind of maintainers for floating UI and kind of expressed interest in working with them to do this. Have not heard back, unfortunately. They're just probably too busy. It's open source. That's how it goes. So what we're actually looking to do is me and a couple contributors within the Skeleton community are looking to kind of build our own solution to this, to kind of fork over these extra React-specific features over to Svelte. And this would probably take the shape of a new custom package that is distributed under the Skeleton Labs kind of organization, but is not part of Skeleton itself because none of these features are Skeleton specific. This could just be broadly available to anybody in the Svelte community that wants this. So kind of look forward to more kind of discussion and announcement around this kind of in the next couple of weeks. But if you're interested in kind of contributing to kind of the eventual, the forward progress and forward momentum of Skeleton, no, this is a feature that it's very high on our list to ensure that we can continue to provide this high level of support for not only our React users, but also our Svelte users as well. In the meantime, I have kind of worked up a couple demos here to kind of showcase what this might look like. And so you can see this is a previous example I showed in the other video today, just showing a couple different use cases for floating UI, kind of drop-down menus, context menus, and then even a modal. So you can see that pop up and display, and it's styled. It looks really nice with kind of tailwind styles and stuff like that. You can imagine that might be, skeleton styles or something like that in the future. Additionally, we have a Svelte-specific demo. And again, these kind of extra features that they provide for kind of use floating hook and interactions and stuff, those don't exist in Svelte today. But we have kind of an early proof of concept here showcasing what that might look like. And so we've built a simple SvelteKit application here. I've got a button. I can click that. You're going to see a pop-up appear. I click it again. The pop-up, the pop-over disappears. It is a little bit more limited in scope. I can't click off of it over here on the right. I can't really kind of interact with the contents within or anything like that. It's just very bare bones. I click a button, it shows, it hides. Behind the scenes, what that's doing here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see, is we've set up just kind of a demo page here. We've got a trigger button and we've got the pop-up element itself. We're using a state rune, and as part of Svelte 5, this is all built on Svelte 5, to kind of control the state of, is it open or is it closed? Should this show or should this not? But here's kind of the special stuff, the thing that I want to really show, which is this use floating hook, or an equivalent in the Svelte world, whatever you want to call that. And it's using the same syntax. So if we come over and look at the syntax for the React use floating hook, you're importing that, you're calling it directly, you're providing a list of options that might be things like, how is the element going to be positioned? Is it the top, at the bottom, left, right, etc.? And you can see we're kind of mimicking that. We're following that same sort of flow. The name of the actual hook, the actual options, the parameters that are provided, even support for things like middleware, which are extended features or think of like extensions for what floating UI can do. And so we're doing all of that. We're even using some of the official middleware, where we're using the official flip hook. And so this little hook that you're seeing here that's being implemented, this was created by another Skeleton contributor named Hugo. And what he's done is come in here and created a little script here. You see it just exports a function, takes in a set of parameters, and it kind of wires up like you would think. It says, okay, we're going to have a reference element, we're going to have a floating element that's bound to a state rune, And then we're going to use some of the features that are kind of imported from floating UI, like the system they use to calculate the position. We're going to adjust the styles for whatever that floating element is. We're going to maybe do some like auto updates. So if you scroll the window, if that needs to like flip or change position, it's using all of the information it needs to do that. Some default settings and things like that are here. And then it passes back a reference or refs that we can use to then hook this into the actual interface on the screen. And so you can see ref is passed back, and then we bind that to the reference button. And then we also bind that to the floating element so that those are kind of provided their roles to act how they need to be. The button is the thing that clicks. The floating element is the item that floats. And so, just using some standard like stylings, I'm just going to class it up to style the button and style the popover. But you can imagine those being skeleton styles or tailwind styles or whatever. So very, very bare bones, but very simple kind of example that we can kind of build an interface that mimics the API that they are using for React. Ideally, we would want to support all of the settings provided here. We would want to have all of the hooks, have all the cross pollination of the features that work together from all of that. But it's going to be kind of a heavy lift. We'll kind of have to build some of that stuff up and over time. So Svelte users, just know we're not forgetting about you. We actually want to fill this gap, and we could use some folks in the community that could kind of jump in and help do that. The other thing I wanted to show is kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive into state management for handling not just a single modal, but if you have multiple modals, which is a very common use case. So I'm going to jump over to this kind of extra demo here, and I'm just going to show what this might look like. And so if I click this trigger button, you're going to see kind of an interface display and appear, right? It's a modal kind of in the middle of the screen. It's got some information that's just being passed, and it's just displaying that. It's displaying its own information. And then if I click close, it closes that. Now it's going to get a little bit more exciting here. I'm going to resize the window so you can kind of see this. If I click multi, you're going to see lots of information kind of display. We've got multiple modal instances, type modal elements displayed here. We've got type toast displayed over here, and everything has its own kind of unique ID. And I can close things kind of, willy-nilly one by one. And so what we're essentially doing is kind of combining what we had in V2 or prior versions of Skeleton, where we had multiple sort of dedicated queues. So you have a queue for creating, modals from modals. You've got a queue for creating drawers, and you've got a queue for creating toasts or alerts. Those were all sandbox. It was 3 standalone features that you had to implement one by one, and that worked pretty well. But the proposal here with V3 is combining those down into sort of a universal store, universal queue. And so you may hear that word, queue, or you may hear the term singleton, and you might be like, what is that? I don't understand that, or that's not something I've ever, interfaced with, or I'm not quite familiar with it. It's a feature that kind of scared some folks away from the way we implement this in prior versions, but it's really a very straightforward concept if you see how it works. So a singleton just essentially means that there's a single instance of, usually a component applied to the page, and then you can reuse that over and over and over through your entire application. So instead of going through and I'm creating a dialog for this page and a dialog for this page and a dialog for this page, I just create a single instance of that and just reuse that over and over and over. And the contents within switch out, right? It's not stuck or hard coded to whatever that is, but kind of handled in a more programmatic fashion. So I've created some illustrations here. It's going to look a little overwhelming. Just bear with me. I'm going to go through things one by one. But I wanted to kind of walk you through and kind of explain kind of how everything works. And so the simplest kind of place to start is going to be right here, which is your root layout. In prior versions of Skeleton, you would come in and you would add something that looked like this. It would have modal or toast or something like that. If I can spell, something like that. You would implement a component in your root layout that would live kind of above your layout or your app shell or something like that. But the general idea is that's just a provider. That's a thing that lives on the page so that you have some place to kind of trigger UI to display on demand. And it's set in the root layout because, again, singleton approach, single instance, lives in one place. If we put it in the root layout, then we have it available in global scope. Anytime we pass data to it, we can make it show or hide or show different contents, things like that. So the usage for that is something like this. We come in and we'd say, okay, we provided the modal provider on our root layout. So anytime we want to show a modal, we would have like an about page or contact page or some other subpage, and we could import that kind of modal system from skeleton, and then we'd have something like a button that triggers a method. So modal.trigger, and then we provide some settings. And those settings could be what kind of component to display, some styles to pass on to it, some metadata to provide in, maybe a callback method if you want to listen to the response or something like that. It could be any kind of sort of data that you're passing in for consumption inside of that modal, right? That single instance. So we could have it here and we could have it here, and it doesn't matter where we call that and where we trigger that. It's all just kind of feeding back from here straight back over to our single instance, right? See, these all just kind of combine down into this one place right here. So simple enough. So what does that look like kind of like from the data model, you might be asking, right? So if we look at like what is the content of modal here, it's really just a state rune. And a state rune in this case would be something like an array. So we might have something that's like, there we go. So we might have constant modal equals state. And that state rune may just be an array. Like it may just have, that may be the only contents within it, right? So we'd have something along these lines here. So it's just an empty array that takes data. So anytime we're doing kind of a trigger method, what we're doing is we're populating, we're pushing that object into that array so that it is then populated. And so the contents of that array could be like multiple instances of modals, maybe one pulled from over here, maybe one pulled from here, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of that is kind of provided different information. So the first modal you put in is maybe it has a particular type defined, it has some kind of metadata that we're providing over. There's the second modal that we're providing that maybe it's a different type and different information, and we reuse these a few times. And then what's actually happening is inside of the modal provider, we're listening to kind of updates to that information. So anytime the store updates, we're coming in here and updating this component. And so we have, something like this comes in here, and it just basically says, hey, anytime the state is populated, we're going to show that interface on layered up on top of the screen, right? That kind of modal interface is going to, transition in. It's going to have some kind of a display, whether it's a modal that fits in the middle of your screen or a drawer on the side or alert down on the bottom. We're going to just basically say, hey, anytime that information is updated and there's content, let's display that properly, right? And so the only other kind of extra bit here is just how we're actually kind of making the decision of what interface displays. And so by defining a type right here, right on this sort of object element, we're saying basically that's what I want to display. So anytime we do that inside of the modal provider, it's going through and grabbing and saying, okay, this one should be type dialogue. It should have a title. It should have a description. And this is just a little component, right? So it's just taking and creating an instance of this modal dialogue component over inside of your provider. Or if it's a type image, it would take this and build that inside of there. And that's just the conditional, right? You could have 1 or 2 or 1,000 different variations of these custom kind of contents that display for the modal. And not only for the modal contents itself, but the position. So does it display in the middle? Oh, then we consider that a modal. Does it consider, is it applied over on the left side of the screen or the right side and slide in, slide out? Then it's a drawer. Does it appear down on the bottom little corner? Then we're considering that a toast or an alert. And so it's a very flexible system in that You can have 1,000 different pages, but you only ever have to set up the modal provider one time. You can have 1,000 different kind of content, elements to display, 1,000 different variations, but they're just individual components that you display. And then anytime you kind of trigger and you create kind of an instance of trigger a new modal to display, then all you're doing is just providing it the data that essentially populates this little object right here. What type of element is it? What sort of kind of key details are being provided? Any styles that are provided? Callback methods, so on and so forth. So that's a singleton system. It, again, seems very complex, and you may be like, what is the benefit of this over just creating a modal instance on the fly? The benefit of this is really scale. So if you have ever worked with a large-scale application, like a dashboard, you may have come into this kind of situation where it's like you have hundreds of different dialogues that are created, or 100 different modals that are created from all over the place. The content within them are switched out. Maybe you need to have some conditional content within each of these. Does it show the title? Does it show the description? Does it show this action? Does it show that action? And so you need that flexibility and that reusability system to be able to do this. And so the only thing that's really kind of lacking here, or I haven't displayed yet, is just how you kind of set all of that up. And so there's really kind of 2 steps, right? 2 or 3 steps. So first you create your modal provider, which is provided by Skeleton. You would import that and display that in your root layout. You would then also say, hey, I'm going to provide you this list of components that are the potential options that you can use. And that's the registry or pre-registry system that we have in place in prior versions of Skeleton. Just saying, here's a list of all of the options of different types of displays or modals or drawers or whatever that you could potentially display. And then finally, we just have it where whenever you import the modal element here, you can trigger it, pass it the settings, and then everything just kind of responds to that accordingly. And so that's everything in theory. Let's see what that looks like in practice. And so I'm going to come over here and go to kind of our little preview here. Again, I can click this trigger button, a modal displays. And so let's see how that's actually being set up. So I have just a little test page here. I'm importing an overlay provider. I'm displaying it. I'm just dropping it on the page. It's just a component that's applied above the little kind of markup that you see on the page, the header and the buttons and things like that. And then I'm also importing a trigger method from that same source, right? And so anytime I click the trigger button, it triggers this overlay method or multiple overlay method. And those are just functions that utilize that trigger method and trigger that. And then I provide an object that has some kind of data in it. In this case, I've limited it down just to type. So you can see this, the single instance just creates a single modal. The multi-instance creates multiple modals and then 2 toasts. And then if we go and look at the provider itself, let's see what it's actually doing when it receives that information, when that trigger method is used and what it's actually doing to consume that. So first things first, we're just kind of outlining the type of data that's provided in. So you can optionally provide an ID. You have to define a type that kind of confirms to those sort of well-defined sort of versions of, hey, it's a modal, it's a drawer, it's a toast. That's kind of the option that you're providing here. We're then setting up a state rune that's an array, kind of like I was showing in the diagram, right? It's an array that just holds any values. And then if we look down here, I'm going to jump down a little bit. You can see when we run the trigger method, which is what we're importing on the other page, we're providing, the contents of the overlay. It confirms, the settings that are displayed here. It automatically assigns an ID if one is not provided. And then it just kind of unshifts, or it applies that to the beginning of the list. Basically the first item in the array for the state rune. So literally just passes the object, plops it into the array, and then that is part of your queue, right? That's your queue. That's your queue is populated now. Now, if we look at a couple of other options we have here, we also have a close all method. So if I go, and I haven't really done this yet, but if we do have a bunch of options that are displayed in the queue, I can come here and click close all, and it just clears that array. It just clears all of those out of that state rune, and the UI updates accordingly. We can also close by a particular one. So that ID that we're assigning, that unique ID, it's just being used as the target, saying, hey, when I close this, if there's 5 items in the array, I want to close this very specific one that has a particular ID. So very, very simple approach to just kind of handle that. Now, if we go down and look in the template itself, here's how the logic's actually playing out for displaying that on the page. So again, remember this is the overlay provider component that's displayed here. And so you can see if the queue is populated, there's more than zero options inside that, then we're going to kind of show this full screen kind of backdrop or overlay. That's the kind of like fade that you see here, this little fade for the entire screen. Have that kind of appear, and then inside of that we have a close button that we're going to kind of fix down to the bottom left corner, and then we're going to kind of loop through and say, hey, if you have any instances that are in the queue that are toast type or any that are modal type, we're just going to loop through those and then just display those on the page. We're just going to use a pre-tag to kind of show the options that are contained within it. And then we're going to say, hey, I'm going to use the close method, provide a little button with the close method that says close this self element, the ID by its own ID. And so by doing that, we've essentially created a queue. We've created a queue. We've got two different buckets of how those are displayed. And so you may be asking yourself, like, where does that division? We only have a single queue, right? But how is it dividing those into the toast queue and the modal queue here? And so if we come back up, we'll see that's happening right here at the very beginning. We're saying we have a single global queue, and then we're deriving from that any that have this type or this type. And so it just immediately filters those and creates sub-queues for each of those. And so we can then go through and loop through those and display those on the screen. So again, I'm going through this very fast. If this is something new to you, feel free to kind of slow down or play back a couple times. But I just want to show that that's kind of the gist of how we're building this system, how we're building this approach of a singleton queue, what the benefits are, and then kind of introducing this kind of new approach to it where we have a single combined, global queue or global overlay system that can take in sort of an infinite number of different types of modals to display. And while we're showing kind of three of the most common use cases, you might have one that's kind of a little bit more unique or a little bit more specific to your application. Common use case might be GDPR kind of pop-up and cookie confirmation, right? We hear folks asking for something like that all the time. Now, that's not something we would maybe we'd build into this or not, but this is where kind of the next part of this process comes into, which is we're considering building this and providing a version of this that has kind of canned options built in, but we're also going to kind of encourage folks to maybe take this code and implement it themselves, implement this component themselves, so that they have like endless control over customizing this and extending, adding their own functionalities, adding their own types, changing the way stuff displays. Maybe your toasts need to display in a particular fashion or a particular style. We're just looking to maybe provide some more of that information in a way that you can take and customize yourself. So I don't know quite what that's going to look like, but just know that that's kind of some of the things we're discussing internally. And again, the display is not showing, this is not polished. This is not showing like modals stacking on top of each other, but you could imagine we could style those to kind of make that look like that particular way. We can make alerts a little bit smaller. They would have a small close button, styling and stuff like that. It will differ in the actual implementation. But conceptually, it's doing everything that we really need a queue system to do. And so again, similar to the pop-ups feature, I did want to kind of cover, these are the proposals and the ideas we're putting forward and the things that we're working on behind the scenes for this. But I want to put it out there to kind of request comments and feedback from you. We're building these features for Skeleton users, for our community, and we want to kind of put it out there and get your feedback of, hey, does this sound like something that would be valuable? Is this something that would be useful for you? Is this working the way you would want it to? Are you opposed to the kind of one-off approach, but you want the singleton, or vice versa? Like what kind of meets your mental model, and what do you think would work best? Because that can help us kind of prioritize some of these features and things like that. But additionally, I do want to showcase, like right now we have our documentation where we show kind of design system features. We show tailwind features like buttons and things like that we provide by Skeleton. We show our list of components. And then we're going to look to maybe add one or two additional categories down towards the bottom that just detail I want to pop up or I want to pop over a feature like a tooltip or a drop down menu, have a little section that kind of walks you through setting up what you need for floating UI and how to actually implement that. An integration guide plus, step-by-step tutorial for doing that. Likewise, we're going to bring some sort of equivalent to the documentation for the modals here, how you import the maybe the canned or default provider, how you make use of that, how you provide, pre-register your components to display and things like that, how you choose where and how everything is structured and displayed in the data model, and we're just going to break those out into kind of a couple different new sections on the page. They don't exist yet, just because again we're kind of gathering the feedback. We're early stages of this, but let us know, and just know that that's where you want to keep an eye on in the future for where that documentation will exist. In the meantime, look down in the description of this video, and you're going to see a link back to the GitHub section that kind of walks you through and talks through it's a written post that kind of talks through and reviews everything we just discussed. There will be a comment section below that, so either in the video or in the comment section of that post, that's where you can provide your feedback to us. Just send us a quick message, say, hey, this looks great, or hey, I don't think this will work really well, or I don't quite understand this, and we'll be happy to jump in and help. I mean, heck, even tell us if you hate it. That's the kind of stuff, the feedback we're looking for. We really want to know what people are kind of needing for very different scales and scopes of applications they're building, and just make sure this is kind of aligning with the mental model that folks have kind of built up. Likewise, we are looking for contributors to maybe jump in and help with that Svelte-specific port for floating UI. So if you're interested in kind of jumping in and helping with that, if I failed to mention it prior, the whole kind of goal here is we might be moving some of the positioning for the drawers and alerts and stuff to use floating as well. So the kind of demo I showcased here earlier where this modal is generated and displayed, that is coming from floating. And there's a few benefits you get from that, which are not just the positioning, but they actually handle the focus state so that you don't have your focus in the background, which is really bad for accessibility, and even like the fade out backdrop. That's all features that are kind of canned options that come from these kind of bonus features that we're going to be looking to build from floating UI. So if you're interested in contributing to that kind of porting process, please let us know. Again, this is outside the scope of Skeleton. It'll be kind of its own standalone project. So we are looking for new contributors. We are looking for new community members to jump in and help move that along, because I think this is going to be highly valuable, highly useful for a variety of users, whether you're using Skeleton or not. So again, feedback and anybody interested in contributing, let us know.